All right. So I'll just continue describing Programming for Humanists. And I'll just for the video's sake say it's available at Programming for Humanists. So you can see the URL up there at the top of the PowerPoint, and that we it's a 2-hour webinar held on Fridays from 9 to 11 Central Time. So I'm going to tell you about my first day this semester. Liz is going to laugh. So here is a recounting of my first day. I need to play this music. I hope you can hear it. My first day was horrible. It was the worst thing in the world. It was just horrifying. Okay, enough. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. So first of all, my lead developer, Matt Christie, was up all night with a sick child whom he had to take to a doctor, so he couldn't come. Any of the people who could have helped me teach the class were out that day, and we hadn't planned backup. So I was completely alone. That's this little figure here yelling help. I went down into the room thinking, it's okay, I've got it under control. The Join Me software that we have used every semester until now had been recently updated, and it now no longer allowed me to project sound to any of the participants. And I got online with the Join Me help people, and they were on my computer. I gave them access to my computer, remote access, and they couldn't get the sound to work. At which point they were asking me for the headset that came with my Mac, and I just was like, don't even talk to me. I can't even deal with this right now. Finally, I figured out a way to call in so that people could hear me, but I thought other people were going to have to call in too. They didn't. Join Me, however, continued to malfunction, and they kept getting kicked off. People kept getting kicked off throughout the 2 hours and had to get back on. But we made do. We hobbled along. Luckily for me, the screen in the room wouldn't work either. So it turned out that wires that allowed you to plug into the wall to the projector to access the HDMI wire that went to the projector, if it gets hot, just goes off or something. Anyway, we found finally one outlet. So I was standing with my computer next to this outlet by a wall that worked, and we projected on the screen for the people that were in the room. So it's fine. I'm starting at half an hour late. I have Join Me sort of working. I have the screen now working. I go to my application on my computer, and Camtasia is no longer on my computer, so I can't record what I'm teaching, which we make the videos available after every class. So I just start teaching, and it went more or less as you can expect. But people were troopers, and they came back, and they didn't quit, which is fantastic. So, but what we learned from this is we really worked hard on getting the physical infrastructure beefed up. We had even tested the Join Me software the day before, but we hadn't fully tested it on my computer. We hadn't done all the things that you really need to do to make 100% sure that something's going to work. The room has continued to malfunction. So every time we test something and get something working, I mean, the last thing we did was put a ladder on the seminar table and climb up into the ceiling and put insulation around a box. So the room has continued to malfunction. Back up, like bring digital projectors with you that you might need in the room, even if there is a projector already in there. That's all I can say about rooms. Recording equipment, we now have multiple options. I do have Camtasia installed, and we got new software. I wish it was as good as this, Lisa, what you've got, but it's called Blue Jeans, and it has recording capacities, and it's quite good, and that's what my university had purchased, so we got hooked up to that. The human infrastructure was huge. What we really needed was a whole scenario about if someone falls ill, who's the next person in the hot seat, and who has to be called and who has to come in, so that we made sure that we always had two people in the room at the same time. Because with me alone, I mean, some people were having trouble getting on Join Me, and I was chatting with them and working with the Join Me guy who was trying to help me on my computer and trying to work with the guy in the room I'd gotten from IT services to get the projector working. So you need somebody else in the room with you to be dealing with chat and dealing with all of these things. So the human infrastructure is crucial, and we started this base camp Programming for Humanists thing, and you can see now we've got blue jeans instructions for moderators and blue jeans instructions for hosts. So there's always a host in the room and then the person who's leading the class discussion. We also have all the guest lecturers. Quinn Dombrowski did Drupal for Humanists already. David Rettenmeyer is going to show a TEI plugin for Drupal. Cliff Anderson's doing xQuery. Stefan Sinclair is doing Python notebooks. And so we have on Basecamp like their phone numbers and all of those things were so that we can call them and figure out, you know, why they're not on or what's going wrong. And so here is the schedule. You can see a little bit of the schedule for Programming for Humanists. And I did an introduction to XSLT, and then because of when Quinn was available, had to skip 3 classes and then go back to XSLT. That's not ideal, and I don't think I'll do that again. But I wanted to show you the syllabus. Quinn did a beautiful job of providing in Dropbox her chapter, her book, and then gave detailed instructions on what to read as well as exercises. My part of the syllabus is much less developed because I'm still working on this book. And so one of the things that I used for 2 of the classes is Dropbox. I don't think Dropbox is ideal for sharing folders with people. The reason is, as I'll show you now, here are the folders, and here's all the people who joined. And people take things in and out as they can, and so things just start disappearing, and then they put them back. So that class 1 fall 2015 PowerPoint shouldn't be there. It just got put back by somebody named Jean. And then if you look down in the major folder, those other things, well, Quinn's book should be there, but the XML document shouldn't be there. It got put in by somebody, Catherine, who accidentally deleted it. So Dropboxes, we also used a Dropbox at the Early Modern Digital Agendas seminar at the Folger this summer. And somebody, it was actually a presenter, somebody who was teaching the seminar, went in one night and emptied all the Dropbox documents. He thought he was just getting copies downloaded on his own computer, but you know, if you've got Dropbox in your Finder window, if you pull things out of it, it actually comes out. So we figured out a way to fix it. There's a little trash can up here, a little trash can icon, and you can actually see all of the things that were deleted and restore them, which is quite wonderful. But Dropbox is not ideal. I do think the really ideal thing for us has been maybe just putting the whole book up like Quinn did in Dropbox, because you can just see one thing is there and whether it's gone or not, and you can restore it. And then putting all the files that you want to share with people in Drupal, making them available as downloads via a Drupal interface or something where you're actually posting exercises and the materials for the class. So here's an example. Here's my chapter 2, which I'm going to be teaching on Friday. And I've got the chapter draft, how to make an XSLT, and people can download that by clicking on it. And then I have exercises here, and then files you may need for these exercises, which they can get either you know, just by clicking or by right-clicking to get those folders. And I think that's a much better system than putting things in Dropbox. For me, it is really hard to teach in webinar software. I have, you know, I think really been disconcerted a lot of the time that I've been teaching XSLT, and it's because I can't see people's faces. One of my students put this up in Facebook reminding me of a class that we had together. I was young back then. And he's now a teacher, and he's now a professor. But at any rate, when you're face-to-face with these people, you can see when with people, You can see when they're confused. You can see their reactions. You know, if they're looking completely clueless, you suddenly get a sense of, okay, back up. I need to go back to basics and say where I am in the material. And I have really had a hard time with the teaching a webinar because of losing that face-to-face contact. Oops, something went wrong. Unless that's the end. Nope. Oh yes, it is. So that's the end. And I wanted to just say that the other problem that I've had with teaching Drupal XSLT is that when you run XSLT, which I do live, so I actually will open Oxygen and have an open XML document and an open XSLT and make tweaks and run things. And when King's College London, when they teach XSLT, they always warn their students, I'm going to tell you what this is going to do. I'm going to run it, and on the third time it will work. And that's the way XSLT is. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are computer science professors, and they can their programming. They don't do it live. They actually will film it and then run the video of it rather than trying to do it live. So doing XSLT programming live is really hard, and I find myself discovering things I didn't know, like at the worst possible moment. So for instance, I just discovered while doing an XPath exercise with my students that // is not the same as ancestor or self in some contexts, even though it should be. And so things like that where I really do stumble a lot when XSLT betrays me, which it does all the time. Now, the thing about it is that really that's what you're doing when you're running XSLTs. Like I'll turn to Matt Christie, who's an expert in XSLT, and he'll be sitting next to me and I'll say, why didn't that work? And he'll say, I don't know, because XSLT is just kind of like that, right? And one student said to me actually afterwards, Laura, it was really good to see you struggling and to see you troubleshooting, because then I realized that just because I wasn't perfect at working with XSLT didn't mean that I didn't know what I was doing. So, there is that aspect of it, but it is very difficult, and I'd love any insight. I know a lot of you teach programming languages. I'd love any insight you might have into how to do it better. So I think I'm gonna stop sharing screen. How do I do that? Oh, there. And, we can just have a discussion here. If anybody wants to see more from the Programming for Humanists class, I'm happy to show that. Or if you have questions or comments about teaching webinars, I'd love to hear. You can just unmute yourself.
Great, thanks, Laura. Could you talk a little bit more about the particular approach you take to teaching humanist programming skills? Are there special things that you want to teach humanists, or particular approaches you take in teaching humanists how to program as opposed to, say, computer scientists?
Yes. Oh, thank you. That's a great question. So I think really one of the things that I've been struggling with in teaching XSLT is I feel like there are metaphors that if people could learn them would make understanding XSLT so much easier. Programmers don't even really like XSLT because it's not very much like other programming languages. But I think I need to give up my search for the metaphor that's going to shoot lightning into everybody's brain and let them instantly understand XSLT. I think that's been, just too much to ask of myself. I also think, though, that there really is something important to teach humanists on bad days when I'm not a digital humanist, when I'm my old traditional English professor self. I get really, really frustrated with software and programming that I've done, coding. I get really frustrated if it doesn't work. And I just think, it's broken, it doesn't work, I can't deal with this. And I think that that's really a kind of traditional attitude, to sort of think that something on the computer should function like a toaster, like it either works or it doesn't. And I think what we really want to teach people is that it doesn't work right now. You have to troubleshoot. You have to look at it. You have to try something else. You have to rethink your way of trying to approach something. We want to teach those kind of troubleshooting skills so that people don't just get frustrated and walk away. And I think that's our biggest challenge, but also what really will benefit humanists the most.
Great, thanks. Other questions?
I have a follow-up to this. So in answering Lisa's question, you mentioned that you are giving up on this metaphor of lightning striking. Do you have another metaphor that you could use to describe this process of troubleshooting?
Yes. Well, I don't have good metaphors for troubleshooting. I should think about that, actually. I mean, the kinds of metaphors that I try to think about are, when I'm trying to explain templates to people in XSLT, I talk about train cars and walking through train cars and picking up clothes as you go and putting them on and then going to the next train car. I mean, I try to use metaphors like that. And every once in a while, I have hit on one that really is helpful to people. And that's what I mean by the lightning striking. They say, oh, okay, that's what those templates are. That's how you pass from one to the other. And I think that instead of, this is how you would code it in Python or something else, is much more helpful. Do you teach with using metaphors?
I do. I teach a lot using metaphors. And
tell me some of your metaphors.
So a lot of our students come from humanities backgrounds, English, history, art history, American studies, and so on. And it's the first time that they are learning to program, right? So the kinds of metaphors I use are at a slightly higher level where I go, look, this is like learning to ride a bike. I can teach you all about learning to ride a bike. You can read a lot of books about riding bicycles, but no matter how many books you read, you are never going to get on the bicycle and succeed the first time, right? Or the other one I use is for swimming. It's the same thing. It's you read and read and read, but once you get into the pool, you are going to drown. And how do you then come back up and deal with it? Right. So as you were describing this metaphor of or using a different metaphor, I was thinking about troubleshooting in the sense of what happens when your GPS fails. So we drive everywhere and we have our Google Maps on, but every so often we run into either a crash on this planned route or there is a construction going on, and then we have to recalibrate on the fly. And then how do you do path finding, wayfinding in the absence of a pre-planned route? I think is the closest metaphor that I've used in terms of debugging and troubleshooting.
Yeah, that's great. I might, if it's okay with you, I'll steal some of those for free.
Please.
They're really good. Yeah, they're great. Because there always is that horrible moment where you've gone through all that you can say about the XSLT, and then you say, okay, let's make one. Everybody open a document and start making your XSLT. And they are like, where do I even start? And that's always a great moment.
Right. Another resource that I have come across in my teaching programming is Learning Python the Hard Way. It's a free book that you can download. And it's called The Hard Way because what it does is the first thing it says is, here is how you install something, and then it leads you step by step, typing up a small program, and it discourages you from using any editors and says, let's go through this step by step and read and understand, because even a space makes such a big difference in a program.
Absolutely, yeah. That's really good. I actually have that book. I haven't cracked it yet, but that's
okay.
Yeah.
I've had mixed experiences with it, but it takes a different approach. Just like you said, it doesn't draw parallels between Python and anything else.
Yes, that's great. That's great.
So I think this presentation touches on a couple of important issues. One is how do we approach teaching students the sort of technical skills that are involved in doing digital humanities work? And the other is how do we develop those skills ourselves? I mean, I've recently worked with colleagues on a study looking at the kind of key skills that are important to digital humanities work. And I think for people of my generation, a lot just kind of learned on their own and slogged through issues until they got where they needed to go. So it's fantastic that there are now these more kind of formal learning opportunities. But I'm wondering, both from your perspective, Laura, and from the collective wisdom gathered here, like how people both develop skills themselves and how they cultivate the kind of knowledge that's required to do digital work with their students.
So I'm not sure if can you hear me? I don't know if okay, thank you. I'm very interested in this, and I enjoy listening to the sort of feedback that I'm getting on teaching humanist technology is kind of the way I'm sort of seeing it. I'm wondering, from my perspective, what's needed is not teaching technology, but teaching the underlying concepts. And I'll just give you an example. You talked about metaphor. XSLT is a tree-based transformation kind of thing. Okay, so I wonder if you kind of, would it be useful to go into class and talk about the abstraction of a tree, of course, by using analogy and metaphor with the real world, with what they're used to in literature, before going to code, which I think is too low level and really distant from what the humanist is about. And so I guess I'm posing that to all of you is because this is sort of the essence of what I do, right? I'm much more interested in teaching artists and humanists the concepts of mathematics and computer science that really lies outside of the domain of code. I mean, I can teach them to code, but that's a technology, let's say. I want to teach them what is an iteration, what is branching, through metaphor and analogy. So I'll just stop there and get some feedback.
I think that's really, really great. I mean, one of the things I try to do in my PowerPoints for each class is to show what's happening in a very abstract way. And so I have built a TEI tree that I show, and we do our XPath exercises by actually running our fingers, or it's actually a genealogy rather than a tree because, of the phraseology in XSLT about child and ancestor. And we just actually run our fingers up and down the various paths to learn XPath and such. And I think that, searching for abstractions is really, really crucial. So I would like to hear what other people think too.
Well, to share a story of personal shame, Laura and I come at this from two different ends of the spectrum, right? She's a humanist teaching technology, and I'm a technologist teaching technology to humanists. And then from my end, whenever I've tried to do these low-level abstract or tried to use low-level techniques to get at higher-level abstractions, I have failed miserably. Partly because I think the smallest step that I can think of is also too much of a hurdle for people who are uninitiated. And I just haven't found the sweet spot yet. I've tried to take a step down and a step down and a step down, but I think what I still end up doing is too high for most of my students. Like I said, it's a story of shame. I don't have a solution.
There's always, for me, there's always these horrible moments in the class where I will have talked about, XPath and how you get to a particular node with an attribute, and somebody will say, so what are the little curly brackets? And I just think, oh my God, they don't even know. Or what are the little angle brackets? Can you say why you're using angle brackets? And you just kind of expect, even as a humanist, you expect people have seen HTML code, or, you expect they've seen some angle brackets somewhere. And it's one of those moments where you have to step back and say, oh my God, I have to remember where I was 10 years ago. So I don't think you should feel particularly. But I know what you mean. Finding an example that they can run, that they don't have to know a whole lot of programming yet to run and actually works is ideal. I mean, the only thing that I've been able to do where I really get people excited is HTML and CSS. Because nobody knows that anymore either because of all the content management system.
Mm-hmm. Can I butt in here for a second? Last week, Kelly Cargyle Cook was on campus, and she was giving a workshop on online teaching. And one thing she really emphasized was that we should choose our pedagogies and our goals before choosing technologies, and match the technology to our goals and our learning outcomes and our pedagogical strategies, not the other way around. And I think that there's always a danger of saying, here's this technology, what can we do with it? And she was strongly resisting that approach. But I was thinking to myself, well, what if there's not a technology available that can get us to where we want to go, but we have to teach online? But we would never get to that point if we weren't putting pedagogy first, or other goals first, and that's when new technologies emerge, right? If we're just trying to fit what we want to do into the existing set of technologies, there's no call for a new technology that could do what we really want to do, right? And so I don't know if we should ever really teach technology. We should always teach using technology to achieve some end, is that wrong? I mean, is there times where we should be thinking of ourselves as teaching technology?
I think that's a really, really good point. And so for the Programming for Humanists class, the people who come often do have a project that they want to work on. So, I'm teaching how to build a digital edition. So you might have like some early modern text that you would like to put up online. So, can I take you from start to finish building that digital edition? So people often do come with various projects, and one of the things we try to do in the Programming for Humanists class is to get them to talk about their projects or use examples from their projects. But yeah, I think I think you're so right. I mean, I think it's just like learning a language. I can sit and try to learn French all day, but if I'm not going to use French, it's just not going to get learned. And I think people taking the Programming for Humanists class sort of have to have some goal they're striving to reach. Mm-hmm. Did I get what you meant?
Yeah, that was what I was driving at, because I've been reading this book by Neil Postman. Now, you could think of him as a reactionary to some extent, but he's talking about technopoly, and as soon as we kind of conform to technology, and rather than making technology conform to us, we turn he says we turn technology into a branch of moral philosophy, right? And we're not really humanists anymore. So if we're going to be humanists, we can't think of what technology wants. We have to think of what we want. Maybe that's maybe that's too agonistic way of putting it, but.
Can I ask a question that maybe connects to both of those points? It's really basic though. Laura, could you say how it was you went about selecting this particular type of technology? Why XSLT? How do you sell that originally to the class?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I started building a digital archive, the Poetess Archive, and to make digital editions library quality, you need to encode them in TEI. That's what will preserve them for beyond any kind of platform. And I usually do a pretty good introduction on the first day of the Programming for Humanists course about the motivation for all this. Why it's important to use TEI, and I tried to get the TEI organization to publish my video about that, but they never did. But at any rate, I do think I have a very compelling case about why we should use TEI code to keep things updatable and usable for the future. If you're going to do the work of building a digital edition, you might as well make it library quality if you can. And then you need XSLT to manipulate that TEI. And there are alternatives now. There are more alternatives coming on the horizon, which is fantastic. So TAPUS, this one group, allows you to just send your TEI, and they'll put your digital edition up. Or there's other alternatives. And content management systems are getting to where you can upload your TEI into them and show things. But one, and this gets back to the other issue, the Neil Postman issue, right? One thing I feel strongly about is that it's really kind of important to know what's going on under the hood. And when you learn XSLT, you can learn all kinds of things that are related to all kinds of technologies that you're subjected to. Like even searching, you can learn regular expressions in TEI, and that shows you how searching kind of works. So it's like, being able to look under the hood of the car and really seeing what's going on behind the scenes. And also, ideally, getting some confidence. Like, I could start looking at code as a humanist, and even if I don't yet know the language, there are resources for learning it, and I can learn it, and I can, there are ways to understand it and to learn it. So, those are the kinds of things that I really hope people get as the broader. XSLT is important for digital editions, but it's also just an example of, the importance of, and this is a way of not being subjected to technology. It's a way of yourself understanding what it's doing when you're working with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Cool.
And I also wanted to say that, we're trying to teach more and more and different things. And, another thing that strikes me is that, especially with data mining, I really want to know how that's working at some kind of deeper level. And just, again, to not have it be a black box that I can't see inside, so that I can understand really what's going on. Those are the kinds of things that have motivated me to learn this stuff as much as I have learned, which is not huge amounts. Like I can't do Python and one thing I wanted to ask all of you, which is one of the things I do frequently in XSLT is one way I've been able to learn this kind of difficult programming language is I'm very good at completely ignoring the things that don't concern me. Kind of like blurring your eyes, and if there's this one part of the page that's all you care about, I can do that. Now that makes for horrible teaching. Like, what's that? And I'll say, I don't know, don't pay attention to that, But on the other hand, it might also be a good skill to learn. Or to see that somebody can actually manipulate programming language, but really at some deep level knowing what a namespace is. I know how to make one. I know what it, sort of what it does, but really, I don't know what it is, I don't know what you think about that. Would you just lose all your confidence in a teacher if she said something like that, or?
I actually teach tools the same way when I teach my students because, I'm in communication. And so I think in some ways have a little bit of leeway so that for communication students, a lot of them are mass comm majors. And so they don't necessarily know the intricate workings of a camera, but they know what aperture is. And so, and for them, they're like, I just need to know what aperture is and then how to manipulate aperture in order to make my picture look right. So if I say to them, yeah, don't pay attention to that part of the code that I did not explain and don't know what it is either, then they're like, oh, okay, it's like, that's fine. I think part of it depends on what kind of discipline you're already in. And in communication, it's completely okay to not know parts. Because the idea is, well, if the camera is, as long as the camera works, you don't necessarily have to know how it's built.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor. Can I steal that metaphor this week? That's fabulous. Because really seriously, I think one thing that has made this class so difficult, and one thing that is pulling me away from teaching programming for humanists, to other just kinds of programming is that I feel like I have to answer all those questions and know the answers. And, really what I want to say to people is don't look at that. Just don't worry about it. Here, I'm going to give you some of that code. You just keep reusing it and don't worry about what it is. And I think the class and the learning experience would be so much better if I could do that rather than actually going through each little line of code and explaining anything, because then it's just overwhelming. It's like this huge, massive amount of detail and nobody knows what's really important.
I think it's really reassuring for students to see that you're also learning as you go and prioritizing which are the parts that you really want to focus on at a given time. I think it lets them know it's okay to just learn one part at a time.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
I would agree with that. That's the thing that I've noticed with my students too. If I can say to them, okay, this is the part I know really well, so we're going to focus on this part. I have said to students, I'm like, if you want to watch me fail, then we can do this other part. And failing doesn't necessarily freak me out. So, that's fine. But then I also tell them, I'm like, if you're going to watch me fail, I get to watch you fail. So we're going to find the parts that you don't know as well, because it's more fun if we fail as friends. And then inevitably, we actually do usually learn a little tiny part that nobody knew. And then sometimes we don't know how to do that thing again once we figure it out. But I think if you do kind of make them feel comfortable with the fact that you don't know, then they feel comfortable. The one thing I do find, though, with undergrads, I don't teach graduate students, so I don't know how this might differ with graduate students or post-baccalaureate students who are taking classes. But with my undergrads, the only thing they want to be reassured of is that if they do push me to teach something that I don't know, that I won't hold them responsible for that information, since I didn't know what I was doing before. And so as long as it's not on the test later, then they're happy to fail together.
I think that's such a crucial point, Tanisha, because I really feel that, failing has to be okay. I mean, what I always want people to do with the XSLTs is, not necessarily follow instructions, but get in there and change this and see what happens. And it breaks, or sometimes you can even make your computer crash with like Stack Overflows. That's really fun.
Well, see, I grew up using computers as a kid. I remember that I got into digital humanities because I loved in the early 80s, PBS in San Francisco Bay Area had a page on the back of programming code where that was age specific. So as a little kid, when I was 4, when I made that little box and those 2 little squares, and then I made them by the end of the year roll across the screen, that was the best day of my life. And I've been hooked on programming ever since. But I had absolutely no interest in like becoming the kind of .com billionaire that most of my friends became, because I wanted to read books and I wanted to talk to people and I wanted to know how computers make the world better or worse or what you can do with them. And so that's why I love DH now, because I can do those sorts of things. But I learned to program through failing programming. So when I ended up with a trapezoid and not a square, that's what I found interesting, though. And that's also what I tell my students, because they find programming really intimidating, because I find I'm very secure in doing it, but I'm only secure in doing it because I started doing it at such a young age. And I didn't know that was bad. I didn't know that I could break anything because I was 4 or 5, I think. And so I didn't really know. And so that's the thing I try to tell them, like, when we do the programming, I tell them, if you're really scared about it, then use the university's computer. If you crash our server, then that's our failure. We should have built a better server. If you crash your computer, then, yes, there might be some crying and gnashing of teeth and a great deal of fear. But that's what I do with them too. When I'm teaching programming, I also don't let them use their own laptops. Because I find that they then approach it like a 4-year-old. They don't know, and they're not scared they're not as scared because they don't know what could go wrong. And then they're not also obsessing about what might go wrong. Because it's not their computer anyway. So they're like, oh well, it died. They just kind of walk away.
Well,
Great.
That's a great thing. Following up on that a little bit, okay, a couple of thoughts. I've had to recalibrate the term failure for my students because they think that not accomplishing a desired result is failure. And I've had to go back and explain again and again and again is in this situation, failure is not a lack of accomplishment, but it's more that if you stop trying, that's a failure.
That's great.
Yeah.
The other thing that I have done, and this is more successful in advanced classes than it is in beginner classes, is that I have, don't quote me on this, given up on the notion of grading. Because people are not willing to take risks if they are going to be graded on things.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've said so I teach this projects class called metadata generation for large data sets. And walking in day one, I tell them, everyone has an A.
Yeah.
Now let's see what we can do. And the grading is not at all based on what they do or what they don't do, but how they approach their project. And this I can do in a projects class. I don't know that I could do this in my intro to programming class.
Right. So did you base the grading then on just project completion, overall project completion, or?
So yeah. So what I do is I have I could share my grading rubric actually.
Oh, that'd be great. That would be great.
Yeah, let me just bring that up. And it's just so much easier to just dump it out than to describe every part of it. But essentially, it's based on certain descriptions of the project. So like user interfaces, evaluation, a project description. And then I require that they conform to certain coding styles, for example. I don't want them to learn to write bad code. So I say, you know what, there is a 10% grade for good code. So it's not so much that I don't want you to explore, but I want you to do this in the right way.
That's great. That's fantastic. That's really like, grading compositions based on process rather than the outcome.
Yeah, so I've just pasted it in the chat.
Oh, this is great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and actually this is an open syllabus, so I'm happy to share the whole syllabus even.
That would be great. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, me too. Because my classes, the advanced writing for the discipline class that I teach this in, I actually tried kind of to grade it based on completion, but it was kind of hard because I didn't have a model for that. So this is helpful.
So this has been a really fantastic discussion. I'm going to need to leave in like 5 minutes to go do another get together. So I wanted to leave a little bit of time for people to make announcements or share ideas or ask questions. And I've got a couple of quick announcements. One is that Rice has its Sawyer seminar on platforms of knowledge going on this year. So we've got a few great speakers coming up in the next couple of months, and then there will be more excellent speakers in the spring. So we have Aaron Jaffe, who's the developer of Reading Lab and director of Humanities and Social Science Center at the University of Louisville on the 22nd of October. John Voss, who is the developer of History Pen and is a leader in the linked open data community, coming on the 5th of November. And then Tara McPherson, who is Associate Professor of Critical Studies at USC and one of the leaders behind, why am I blanking on the name? Vectors and Scalar. So you can find out more. I will put the URL for our list of upcoming presentations in the chat.
Yeah. When is Tara McPherson coming?
That's on the 3rd of December.
Oh, great.
Oh, cool.
And also a quick reminder, there are 2 upcoming deadlines for calls for papers for the Digital Humanities Conference this year in Krakow. That's on November 1st, as well as for Haystack. I think that's also on November 1st, and that's at Arizona State, so less of a hike. Does anyone else have an announcement or a question or comment?
So I have a kind of a sneak preview. I'm on the ACMI EEE JCDL program committee, and the JCDL paper deadline is going to be January 17th. The workshops deadline is slightly earlier, around January 7th or so. JCDL is it's a blend of researcher and practitioner community for digital libraries. So not so much focused on humanities necessarily, but more on the practice of creating, managing, using digital collections and studying the communities that use collections, which is pretty much everyone these days. So the conference will be held in Newark from June 19th to 23rd. Just another event to keep an eye out for.
Great, thanks.
I've got one. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. So ATTW, which is the Association for Teachers of Technical Writing, it's always in the same city as the C's, 4Cs conference. And so this year, C's is in Houston. And if anybody missed the C's call, which is way too early, in my opinion, but and is looking to get a paid trip, right, to see C's, even though they aren't presenting anything. The deadline for ATTW is October 15th. I'm one of the reviewers for it. So if you get a paper accepted to ATTW, you could stay for C's, right? Vice versa, so yeah.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
I'll just mention quickly that the Humanities Visualization Space in College Station in our it's 433 Liberal Arts and Humanities is streaming events from the Rise Up October March on October 24th, which is a Saturday. And we're streaming and collecting data using Idea Mache, which was built by a computer scientist called Andrew Kern. You know him, don't you, Unmil?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Andrew's great.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, so we're just going to be using Idea Mache and then having a hack fest later to play with the data using Idea Mache. So anybody is welcome to come. Just email me.
All right, anyone else?
Mm-hmm.
Going once, going twice. Well, thanks.
I just want to say thank you for hosting and thank you, Laura, for presenting.
Yes, thank you, Laura. That was great. Thanks for the great discussion, all.
Yeah, absolutely.